Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, the number one tabletop role-playing game stuff. You know the drill and all the land. Uh, sorry, should I say your favorite? Because this other one is the number one. But who's number one in my heart is
Yeah.
Teos Abadia. Hey,
Oh,
Teos.
hey,
Yeah.
Shawn. I did a thing that I really need to do more often, which is to walk in the woods. I took a
Okay.
long hike, woods and mountains. Living right by the Columbia Gorge. It's gorgeous. You can just see
Mm.
what I did there. It is incredible, and so we went and walked up this big huge mountain and got views of forests and wildflowers and vistas and panoramas, and all of it just filled my mind with creativity. And so that is if you only get one benefit from this show, it's get out there, because it's just
Yeah.
beautiful out there, and it inspires you in terms of your RPG games creations and so on.
Yeah. The last trip I made to the Northwest was Seattle.
Mhm.
And I still remember we were driving, we'd rented a car and we were driving. And I thought, look at that weird cloud in the sky there. What is that? And then I realized it was Mount Rainier.
Yeah,
And I just couldn't even fathom that whole
yeah.
thing. And so we drove out and did some hiking there, and it was absolutely amazing. So
Yeah, seeing Mount Hood, I mean, you can see it just
yeah.
driving around Portland, but you see it when you go out to that area of the Columbia Gorge, and it's just
Yeah.
awe-inspiring. Yeah.
Mhm. And also awe-inspiring are our
Mm.
listeners who inspire us in so many ways, usually with awe, sometimes with other emotions. Uh, and and they occasionally will write to us with some questions or comments. So we're going to dig into at least a couple today. We've got three lined up. We'll see how far we can get through them. Starting with Scipio 202 via our Patreon Discord. The question is, how do we make equipment matter more in a way that fits with 5e and
Mhm.
how most people play? Other systems that make equipment matter more tend to use encumbrance. So choosing the equipment to have is a major factor. Like, do I have this useful item being part of the challenge and the fun? Most 5e tables don't use encumbrance, so the fun is going to be more. Can you come up with something creative using some equipment to solve a problem? How do we encourage that as 5e DMs? Some of it is situation design, creating open ended problems amenable to creative solutions. But then how do we encourage players to think of do something clever with equipment rather than with spells or class features? Can we give out items that facilitate creative problem solving? Or we can, but how do we signal to players that they should hold onto them and think about how to use them rather than treating them as flavor and fluff items? I wonder if a good starting point is to just start to ask about equipment when players want to do something creative. Like that'll be a DC 15 check, but I'll make it 12 if you have an item that you think will help you. Do that several times, and maybe the players will start to think about how to use their items unprompted. And I love this question. I think
Mhm.
it's a very important question, but I want to just take a step back and rather than saying, how do we ask the question, should we?
Mm.
Because as the question sort of insightfully addresses, this is as much a game design problem as a play style question. In this
Yeah.
edition of D&D and in many of the previous ones, the what can you do question is answered mainly by looking at the powers, the skills, the spells, things that you have. The game balance and the game play is about spreading those abilities over a party and then forcing teamwork to solve the problems. When you move in a direction of having equipment solve problems where it is not meant to solve problems, you can still have a great time, right? You can still play that way. It is a perfectly fine play style, but it then becomes, as you've talked about with Shadowrun, it's who can create the
Mhm.
uh, most options by collecting the most equipment. Now, there are games that lean into this idea of equipment mattering. Fate does this, where you could use aspects, or you could create aspects
Mhm.
to get boosts to say, I have the perfect piece of equipment, so therefore I get a bonus. I think 2d20 games do it, where you
Yeah.
start with rolling
Yes.
2d20. If you have the perfect bit of equipment, you add
Yeah.
a d20. So
Yeah.
it's built into the system. I think the Cypher system might do something similar, where if you
Yeah.
have a bit of equipment
Yeah. It
that
lowers the
matches, it
DC.
lowers the number that you need to
Yeah, and
reach.
free league games often do that. Not all of them, but a number of those will do something where you get a benefit for the whether it's a die, it depends on the system, but you get some bonus. And I think that
Mhm.
I mean, am I cutting you off if I say something now?
No, no, please go.
So I think there's this question of what we want it to do,
Mhm.
and a lot of it I think comes for often it comes from a sense of nostalgia of back when we spent our AD&D copper
Mhm.
pieces and silver pieces on something like a mirror, and then it
Yep.
mattered. Or
Yep.
we solved a problem with, rope and a python. And that happens because there were no skills. It
Mhm.
happens because situations were often very unfair. And
Mhm.
we had to, and there were no solutions in the adventure. The DM didn't have a
Right.
solution. And so you had to solve it with whatever was at hand. And because your gold was so precious and there were no kits, you had chosen what to spend your money on and made the
Yep.
decision of more torches or a very expensive mirror. And this isn't really kind of what players want today, even if they
Mhm.
might aspire to that kind of creativity. They don't really want to not be able to afford gear. They don't really want to not have skills. They don't really want to
Mhm.
have the game be so wildly unpredictable and really kind of unfair that there is no possible solution outside of you finally convincing your DM that this should work after many tries, right? And
Yep.
so
Yep.
that's all gone.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And to sort of compound that, when we do interact with items, it's generally in the form of magic items, which again do
Hmm.
very specific things.
Yeah.
They change the math.
Hmm.
They give you the ability to boost some skill or ability you already have. They provide new abilities. They let you shoot 10d20 fireball, 20d8 fireballs or d6 fireballs out of them, right? It's not like this thing that is utile in so many different
Yeah.
ways. And so to make a sort of statement that how do we do it, we need to come to the realization of what the game is meant to do,
Yeah.
which is not that, sadly.
Yeah, and so I think if if what you want to do is say have players mention their gear and care about their gear, then what Scipio mentioned here, will absolutely do that. Where your players will constantly go like, I have this thing. Can that give me a benefit? And then it
Mhm.
lowers it. And I think at their worst, sometimes these various games you mentioned kind of do that too, where you're just sort of like, well, I'm about to make a roll. I would like to
Mhm.
lower this. So hey, I have a walkie talkie. Can I lower that? Okay.
Mhm.
Because I'm going to make a
Yeah.
noise to distract the creature or whatever. And
Mhm.
that's fine because it's a certain amount of creativity and that can kind of tick the box a
Yep.
bit. But it becomes okay ish, I think, in play over time to
Yep.
just do that because you're just sort of lowering, you're just finding the reason to lower the DC. And you might build off of it and
Mhm.
be creative, but it's not guaranteed. It'll vary by group. A
Yep.
creative group would already be being creative. I don't know
Right.
that it does this.
Yep.
If what you want to do is go back to really the idea of creative play, right? How do I solve these problems? That is really difficult because it requires that there aren't easier ways to solve the problem, like making a skill check.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the skill checks and the powers that are in the game now assume that you have the equipment, right?
Yeah.
You can make the lock picking check because you have lock picks. You can make the athletics check because you have the gear that allows you to do it. So
Yeah.
there's sort of that assumption that the equipment's already tied into to all of this.
Yeah. One of the things I've looked at is when you give someone an item or feature or whatever that lets you magically conjure, and there have been various versions of this across editions, magically conjure a piece of equipment that's pretty low in cost.
Mhm.
it just never gets used. I mean,
Right.
kind of never,
Yeah.
because you don't need it. Like you already have a full kit of all the stuff you needed, and everybody else with you does too. But also, there just aren't that many useful items. Every now and then you can do fun things. It's been impressive what I've done with a chicken in a game.
Mhm.
But it tends to be more expensive things, right? Like I can think when I've done things like, say, given a robe of useful items,
Mhm.
that creates a little more creativity, actually, a lot more, right? Having a big ladder that
Mhm.
you can just summon into place, having a canoe that you can do to, like, say, as has been used in my games, to cross a pit
Mhm.
or to
Yeah.
trigger a trap with a canoe is quite fun. And, that actually works because it's so what you wouldn't have with you. And so
Right.
it can't,
Right.
and there's a finite list. So you have something that one player is just going through that list, thinking about it in the brain, and then they will use that in fun ways.
Yeah. And there is, I would say, a difference between just equipment and MacGuffins or
Hmm.
important plot items
Yeah,
where you do have to keep
sure.
reminding
Sure.
the players that, yeah, you are now at a door with a ruby lock. Remember the ruby key you found 6 sessions ago? Yeah, now's the time to pull that out. And if the players can remember, that's super fun. If you have to remind them,
It's
it's
less.
just more reinforcement that
Yeah.
this is not a game that manages
Yeah.
equipment at that level.
Yeah, it's tough. It really is hard. I mean, I think that's why we see some of these OSR type games that'll have, say, equipment slots. That is only useful when you don't have a very strong skill system.
Mhm.
Like Shadow Dark tries to do that. It says you're good at X, and it names a thing, but doesn't really create a skill for it. And then you have gear, so that means your gear goes up in value because you don't
Mhm.
have all of these various skills. And so you almost have to go back to that level if you really want to see people get creative. At which point people would say, wouldn't it be great if we had a skill system?
Right, right,
I mean,
exactly.
it's tough, but it is true. And the more you go there, I mean, I think you can see that across the editions of D&D. The more we lean
Sure.
into the skills, doing what skills should do as a skill system, the more that gear just becomes less and less useful.
So great question, Scipio. I hope, despite our turn there, that the answer is useful. Now we have Alan Tucker via our Patreon Discord asking of impending releases in the next few months. What are you most excited to get your hands on?
Hmm.
Now, as a reminder, the next four are the Dragon Delves anthology, the Aberon Forge of the Artificer book, Heroes of the Borderlands starter set, the FR Forgotten Realms player guide, and Forgotten Realms adventure guide. So Teos, what one is tickling your fancy the most?
Yeah, I mean, the starter set is the one that I want to see what they've done the most, right? Especially with this idea that's an idea you and I have been chatting about for quite some time. What if you have a character that you could sort of easily put together as part of the new player experience? You could choose, almost like a block of features and put it on.
Mhm.
That concept, I'm super interested. I'm also always interested in what people do with the Caves of Chaos because it has a lot of raw potential that often falls short for some folks. So seeing what they do that could be cool. My runner-up is the Forgotten Realm. I don't know what they mean by player's guide versus adventure guide, but seeing what they do with the next iteration of the FR setting, because it's been done so many times that there is that temptation to do it a little differently or to do it better. And can you do that? And with the format they might have, I'm very curious what they'll do there and what I can learn from it.
Mhm. Different Shawns are very much excited about the different things here. The Shawn that is most prevalent right now is this idea of teaching the game and getting this, going to a new generation. And our main topic today is going to be teaching a new generation about D&D. So that was the one that I'm, like Teos, most interested in seeing. And my runner up is probably the Eberron book because I love Eberron so much as a setting. Uh, if I knew I was going to be running an Eberron campaign, or if I knew I was going to be working in the Eberron setting for something coming
Right.
up, this would definitely be on top. But it's just Eberron and the Forgotten Realms, they're not on my radar right now. So,
Yeah,
and I
sure.
love a good anthology. I love short adventures. Uh, I love dragons. I love delves. So I want to be excited about this, but the proof being in the pudding. Whenever these new anthologies come out, and I'm always like, "Oh, I can't wait to see this!" And then when it comes out, I never even look at it because I'm always working on something else.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah, I think I've had mixed feelings with the various anthologies I've seen. If they're classics, I know them so well, so I want them to be new so that I don't know them. But then often I have mixed feelings. You know, there are some adventures that I really love in any one of them, and then others that I go, yeah, this is okay. It's hard. It's also hard to say. I want to give you things that you can just use as a separate, disconnected one shot, but that it has a theme that pulls it together. Maybe a story I
yep,
can weave together. It's trying to do a lot there.
yep.
And the same was true of classic versions of those. Like, you know, when you have like the books of random encounters, or I forget what all the various names are across the ages, but there were some fun ones in Tui and stuff. And it was the same thing. Some of them I would love, some of them I'd go, this is an okay adventure.
Yep. And we'll end our questioning there because we've got some news to get to, but there are some questions in the queue here that I can't wait to answer next week. Now to our news and commentary section, starting with you lose one, you scratch your head. You lose two, you wonder what's going on. Jeremy Crawford is leaving D&D. Uh, Jeremy was recently named the game director for D&D, but then, like Chris Perkins, he is departing. Chris has already retired, apparently, and Jeremy will leave later this month. So within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Uh, so, yeah, instant reaction, Teos.
um, I was shocked. So I often hear things. I had not heard that this was coming. Some of my friends had. And so it was a complete shocker to me, and not a thing I expected. So I have to wonder, you know, why. And some of it is, you know, hey, you're getting older, you've done the same thing for ages, and then your buddy Chris is leaving. It makes some sense to go, you know, this is you would of course ask yourself. I mean, you and I know this at this age. You have to ask yourself, is this my time to step away? And it can
Mhm.
feel like a really good time. I can see how this can feel like we got this new edition out. I got a lot done. Everything else would be sort of rebuilding for this iteration of D&D, this 2024 version, and that's a whole different type of feeling. And this is a good time to take a step back, so it makes sense. But it also can't help but make me wonder what's going on the corporate side, right?
Mhm.
Is there this sort of budget pressure, as there's been in some years, to say, hey, some of these folks that have really top heavy salaries, what if we, you know, encourage them to head out, make, you know, sweeten the pot for them? And that happened during some of the layoffs. It's at various times, not just the most recent ones. So it's entirely possible that there was some encouragement, not because they want to see them go, but just from a purely financial motivation. I don't know that that's what happened this time, but when you see two big people head out, it's possible then, and Chris Ko left as well, you know, it's possible that there's this idea of freeing up the budget somewhat. And you have to wonder if the strategy is going to be the same, right? So the strategy can be, now your next generation of designers start rising up and over time get those good salaries, and we repeat this as we always have before. It's also possible that they're looking at D&D Beyond and saying, you know what? Let's just work off of third-party creators for the majority of our revenue.
Mhm.
And let's pull back on what we do inside the D&D team. And that can be another reason, you know, if you're hearing that that's the way things are going, that can be a reason why, where you're at the top, you say, maybe it's time that I head out. You know, and
Yeah.
other folks can help facilitate that and work at that level. We won't know for some years probably whether that's the situation here, but I can't help but wonder that. I'll stop and see what you think.
Oh, I agree with all of that. Jeremy started on the editorial team
Mm-hmm.
and then became more and more involved through fifth edition's design in 2014, and then became the rules architect for this 2024 edition. So, Jeremy has slowly risen over the years in position
Yeah.
and power within the company. and he became the face of the new edition in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So if Chris Perkins was the face of play
Mm-hmm.
for a long time,
Mm.
especially as the streaming paradigm grew, Jeremy was the face of the rules
Yeah.
for a long time. And
Yeah.
I found it interesting that Jess Lanzillo, who is a vice president there in overseeing D&D, said that basically what you said. Right, this is something that the company was prepared for. Uh, they departed on their own terms, wasn't the company, and other folks are ready to step up and take their position. So she mentioned James Wyatt, who has been there longer
Forever.
than
Yeah.
Jeremy Crawford.
Yeah.
Uh, and Wes Schneider, who has been on the editorial and the rule side of things. So I could see James stepping into Chris's role. I could see Wes stepping into Jeremy's role. And she mentioned Justice Armon, of course,
Mm-hmm.
would also be taking on more leadership responsibilities, as he already has when he was announced. I forget the title exactly, but basically,
Mm-hmm.
leading the D&D design
Yeah.
sort of team. So I'm not shocked. I'm not surprised. Uh, but when two people with such high profiles uh, go in brief succession, it it does, in some people's minds, ring alarm bells.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't advocate alarm bells necessarily, but more that D&D has always struggled, or let's say across the years there have been times when D&D has struggled with whether to remain focused on being a publishing company.
Mhm.
And that means the typical things, right? You make a core books, and then you make supplements for it, and you make adventures, and you keep that going, and then something else, right? And even the OGL was part of that. Well, what if we just make the core and we kind of don't make a lot else? We just make the most profitable books, and everybody will make the other stuff. And you did get a
Mhm.
glut of the other stuff, but you also had the smarter companies say, we'll make core books too.
Mhm.
We'll make
Yep.
our version of the core books. And the most core books were the Paizo ones, right? Which were Pathfinder. And
Yeah.
because that's where the money is. And so, these folks aren't kind of dumb. And so at some point, you realize that your strategy was wishful thinking, and you go right back to making the same things you used to make, and you make, another edition and whatever. And so there's always been this cycle as D&D tried to not do what it did and then came back
Right.
to itself. And so this may be one
Yeah.
of those cycles that we have to go through. We'll see. That I'm always curious about that. Those things aren't terrible. They're not destructive. At least in the past, they haven't been.
Right.
But you never know.
Yeah. It is an interesting business prospect to imagine.
Yeah.
And in the quotes from Jess Lanzillo, she also said the roadmap remains the same. We've already set up the leads for all future projects, and Chris and Jeremy don't need any substitutes for their roles in those. Now I'm not quoting, but summarizing,
Sure. Sure.
for their roles in those projects.
Yeah, I think something that when you mentioned how Crawford started in the editorial team, and the first time I ever met Jeremy was at Winter Fantasy when he came and he actually kind of voluntarily scheduled a thing with a number of people who had written for Dungeon and Dragon magazine. He just
Mhm.
scheduled a small meeting, and we just gathered together by some of the tables, and he just kind of wanted to have a conversation about what it was like to write for D&D and thoughts and to trade ideas, and it was a lot of fun. And so I first saw him as this, he was an editor, right?
Mhm.
He was the editor. Um,
Yeah.
and what was interesting is as he got promoted, that editorial group got really small and even vanished at times and became just
Yeah.
outsourced. And I think that had a big impact on D&D. And so one of the curiosities would be whether that will grow back in any way,
Mhm.
because his benefit came from going into other directions, right? And being the rules person, looking at that engine, and the editorial group, especially developers or things like that used to always exist haven't been there. I'm curious whether that'll come back somewhat.
Yeah. And speaking of James Wyatt, we get news from him on Dragon Delves and on how a one DM and one player mode will be supported. So Christian Hoffer spoke to James about the solo adventures in the upcoming Dragon Delve. What did James have to say about this concept?
So it was interesting. The first thing was this tripping up, or does it mean solo adventures? Does it mean one DM, one player? And so he quickly clarified it meant one player and one DM, and that they had really looked at this book as a way of creating flexibility to be able to do various types of play. So he thought, hey, and he goes into detail about, oh, somebody didn't show up today, and actually someone else just canceled, and oh, look, it's you and me. What do we do? Right. And so instead of, as he say, play cribbage, which I like in his quote, wouldn't it be more fun if we could play D&D like we planned? And so he says, these three adventures can be run with a whole group just fine, but they've each got a special set of guidelines to help a solo player stay alive and to make the adventures fun and fulfilling for one player as it is for 4 or 5. And so he's asked by Christian Hoffer what makes that happen, and also mentions the sidekick rules, right? Because those used to be present in Tasha's and some Unearthed Arcanas. He says Wyatt says there's a little supernatural gift, the boon of the lone hero or something like that gives you a significant buffer of temporary hit points so that you can survive the attacks of monsters coming at you. And we give the solo player inspiration. I think it's at the end of every long rest you take during the adventures, you get heroic inspiration so that you're just a little bit more on your toes and capable. But we also singled out these 3 adventures because they're the ones that are less combat driven, have a lot of opportunity for that one player to interact with NPCs in the environment, and hopefully be a rich storytelling experience for these 2 players. And he didn't really speak to that question about sidekicks, but I thought that was super interesting that this could have been the opportunity for that. They didn't do that. They just kind of made it so you'll survive this scenario, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's odd.
Mm-hmm.
But it does, I mean, game design wise, it makes sense, right? Because what's the game about? It does. Without having to create a whole new system, right? What's D&D about at its roots? It's about taking the monster's hit points before yours are taken. So if you want one player to be able to do it, what do? What's the simplest line from A to B? It's that straight line of give them a bunch more hit points. Now,
I don't know.
It's a different mode of play.
Sure.
And I think that's the thing, right? We get stuck in this idea that D&D has to be one DM, 4 players, 4 to 6 players playing in, a 2 to 4 hour slot where you do these things. And I think wizards and their designers are in a perilous position because if they try to step outside that mode, they get criticized.
Sure.
But if they don't do the things that people want within the mode to try to do those other things, they get criticized. So I can understand. I part of me has that same feeling you do about you could have created this grand system, but that's
or the
not
system you already made before.
Sure. Yes, for sure. And so it's a challenge that you can't do well enough.
Yeah, but I guess so. What did we do in the olden days, right? We ran more characters. The DM would play a character.
Yeah.
Ostensibly an NPC, depended on the DM how well they did that versus their character. And then you would often run 2 characters. Now you had 3 characters and you would survive. Maybe you even got a hireling to go with you or bought a dog or something like that. But now you could handle well enough and then you just rested more often, right? So that's fairly simple too. It's not ideal, no, but we often did it. There are the sidekick rules, which work pretty reasonably well. I've tried them; they've been reasonable, and we had a version of those for 4th edition as well. I think those were in the 3rd starter set, right? And so that could have been there. I guess it's just a pile of temporary hit points is I mean, I guess it works, but hopefully you don't have any features that give yourself temporary hit points, because now that would be kind of redundant. But
Yeah, like I said, it's the sidekick. I love the sidekick rules, but that's just a way to get to the one DM and 4 to 6 characters. Everyone's playing the character,
sure,
right? And so I like the attempt. I like the attempt, and I like the. All right, we have this problem
sure.
or we have this design that we're trying to do. We have 30 seconds to figure out a solution. Ready,
But they
go.
had longer than that. But I hear you. I hear you. It's fine.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to step outside of
Yeah.
the mindset
Yeah.
and see what.
Well,
so I'm not like that's brilliant.
Right.
What I'm saying is, if that's the experience that you're trying to shoehorn into this adventure that is built for a 1 DM and 4 to 6 characters, what options do you have?
Well, and to go to your thing of 30 minutes, I mean, or 30 seconds, that may be a little more accurate than we think, because Wyatt sort of had an interesting quote where he sort of revealed that the book had been initially shelved. He said, this book had a complicated life cycle, so they weren't planned that way from the start. We actually shelved this book for a little while, and then we came back to it and we said, okay, what do we have? What are we steering this book toward? And that's really where the vision of trying to fill variety gaps and play experience was formed. And so, yeah, it probably, this had some various takes on things. And then with the new edition and looking at how to use it, that's where they ended up going. So, yeah, it's fair. You're trying something new and see, and it probably will generally work well enough for 1 DM and 1 player. And that's good that a product.
You know what we should do, Teos?
What should we do?
You know what we should do? We should absolutely play this when it comes out as 1 player.
Let's do it. Let's play it on the.
All right.
Yeah, we'll do it. Kind of like when Enrique and Mike Shea. That was super fun. Yeah. Wyatt did give us 3 loose descriptions for the adventures, for 3 of the adventures that support the solo play: a dark fairy tale gold dragon wormling encounter, a monastery with monks and a bronze dragon, a copper dragon referring back to journeys through the Radiant Citadel. So tying into that.
All 3 good dragons, by the way.
Yeah.
Supposedly. So we'll take a look at that when it comes out and give an updated opinion.
That's
as
good.
We go. One thing I think we do share an opinion on is tariffs and what the heck is going on. So we reported last week that a 54% tariff on goods from China was imposed, which escalated to 145%, with other countries receiving a 90-day pause, apparently encouraging countries to negotiate terms. Then China added 125% tariff to U.S. goods in retaliation. So we just get this back and forth volatile situation where things are expected and then walked back, but then reinstated, and it's a continuing mess. What else do we know about this situation, or what have RPG companies been telling us?
Yeah, so there were a couple of things. Like I heard from one creative who was saying that they have printed RPG books as part of a Kickstarter crowdfunder, waiting for shipping from China. And the person they're talking to is saying, well, this is a game, not a book, even though it's an RPG book. And so that exemption, and Ian World had a story on this as well, but that exemption is starting to come into question as to how often it will happen. Now, I know someone else who working printing and shipping from Canada, that Canadian printer was able to get their exemption as an RPG book from those Canadian tariffs. So it can really vary, right? You might have to struggle to find the person who will exempt it, and there is some reality to the idea of it being sort of legally considered a game rather than a book, which would be a huge problem when we're talking about these above 100% tariffs. Cardboard Edison had a really, really interesting survey of various board game publishers and designers, and they said they interviewed 62 publishers, or heard back from 62 publishers. 52 always print their games in China, so almost all. 9 said sometimes. Only 1 said we never manufacture in China. So everybody else got lumped in here. And really what it said was some big things like prices are going to go up, right? Like there was just vast agreement amongst the people polled. We will have to raise our prices. It's almost impossible that won't happen. We will shrink our print runs. So when prices go up, demand goes down, we have to print less. So there will be fewer copies of each game. We will have delays because, in fact, we're going to wait to see how things go. Then we'll start putting out some games that we already have planned. We will have fewer new board games. We'll sign fewer designers on. We'll sign fewer games on. We will scale back the size of our games to make them, a smaller box, fewer units, all of that. We'll look at different formats and all of that. So I thought that was really a fascinating article. And ICV2 had an article on that whole idea of whether you have exemptions or not as being a role-playing game book. And so they had a lot of interesting data on that. So this is just, unfortunately, it will continue to go, right? I mean, last week we recorded with one reality, and you and I were on the Lorecast talking about that reality. And then a day later, it was different. And then this weekend, it was things like computers are exempt, but this is temporary because we're going to decide which parts of computers are or aren't exempt. And so there's just so much that could happen. It's really hard to tell where it'll end up. But it's almost impossible for it not to raise prices no matter what. Yeah. It could all end, and I think we'll see prices go up.
Yep, I agree. Well, we can always recycle, though. And that's what Atlas Games is doing after receiving a $100,000 grant from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So Atlas Games, I assume, is stationed in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Got this grant to be used to purchase an extruder capable of processing 65 pounds of plastic per hour. So their goal is to process 50 tons of recycled plastic in the next year. This is right up your alley here, Teos. So explain a little bit more about what's going on.
It's super cool. And I think this started back a while ago. Atlas Games did a crowdfunder for a game made out of recycled parts. And I think it led them down this rabbit hole of exploring things. It resulted in this $100,000 grant. So with the grant, they're buying this huge extruder so they can take in all this recycled plastic and make products available that are made from recycled plastics. And that's already available now. You may be able to see these in your game shop. You can order them from their atlas-games.com/replay. These products have the Replay logo and are from their Replay Workshop line. So you can buy things like miniature markers, terrain tiles, dice that all have that Replay logo. And if you look at them, they look great. They look really cool. They have also, Atlas Games has also launched their Sprues recycling program, working with game stores to collect old sprues that all the parts, come on, you pull them off, and plastic miniatures as well. And Atlas will turn those back into products as part of the Replay line. Very cool.
Yep. We have a blog article from Graham Ward for the new GM, Exploring Creative Play. So Graham was on the show with Teos talking about 100 Dungeons. Right? That's the name of it. Did I get that right?
100 Dungeons, yeah.
100 Dungeons. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then he put this article up to sort of talk about the style of play that a game master can go through to encourage creativity in the players. And I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing, but it was very well written. The parts I read, very in depth. He talks about things like getting beyond the rules so you can lead with the fiction. He talked about creating at the table, managing the scope of the adventure and the encounters, and surprising yourself as the game master with the results, challenging the players but not challenging their dice. So keeping the solutions open, and understanding that combat is not the real game. Anything pop out to you in this article, Teos?
It's great, and this is an excerpt from 100 Dungeons, which is always great, right? I love when
Mhm.
books have, like we talked about this when we reviewed Daggerheart, where it had this neat world building insight, and here this is just like a how-to of how to envision the type of game you want to run, and think about
Mhm.
the elements that will make the game great. And so it's everything from how to improvise, and how do you do that, right? You do it through listening and seeing what makes the game part of it. What's going to make this a neat scene? Surprising people, and just neat. Like he has a section on where it's called "Moderate with Care," and he says, "I sometimes joke that 1/3 of role-playing game GMs are teachers, another third are software engineers, and the last third did theater. There's
Mhm.
a reason why these personalities have become archetypes of the GM." And it's a great, right? It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes so much sense. And so he talks about the enthusiasm that you bring, the judgment you apply to applying rules, your creation of conflicts, creatures, and magical forces that confront the party. It's really just great, great, insightful stuff. And another reason why everybody should check out 100 Dungeons, because it really just has this kind of great advice to facilitate
Mhm.
your game.
All right. And in our creator corner this week, we have Hits the Fan, the TTRPG heist hilarity by Thought Punks. So this game is a satirical heist game where every job goes wrong and your team is known for its spectacular failure. The quote is, "Your crew is renowned not for precision or talent, but for its magnificent ability to turn disaster into art. Flooding casinos, accidentally marrying a mark, or starting a cult mid heist. These aren't setbacks, they're your signature moves." What do
Yeah,
you think?
this sounds like a lot of fun. I saw
Yeah.
this on Mastodon and checked out that you can download a free version of the rules. It looks great. It's live on Crowdfunder. It's about $380 from funding. So crowdfunder.com. Uh, Check out, look for this game. The TTRPG heist hilarity hits the fan. Um, I played Fiasco this last weekend because I did not have enough players. Have you
Yep.
heard that before? And so there was just three of us, and we played Fiasco, and it's so interesting how it creates this shared fiction, right? You just start all
Mhm.
adding layers of the world, and it involves this idea of failure. And so when I saw it hits the fan, I thought, oh yeah, this would be perfect,
Yeah.
because that idea that you're a crew that is known for failure, and so people might hire you deliberately to mess things up, rather than
Mhm.
because they think you're going to actually steal, the crown jewels or whatever it is that you're going after.
Right.
I thought that was really great.
Yeah, that's right up my alley, and I can't wait to take over. Take a little look at it. So that was our news and commentary section.